I always believed a father could survive anything as long as his family stood beside him, but everything I thought I knew shattered the moment my phone lit up with a message from my son. We've decided you should step away for now. Not a conversation, not a reason, not even the smallest fragment of respect, just a cold dismissal delivered in a family group chat as if I were a burden they had finally gathered the courage to throw out before I could breathe. My reply sent itself. Then I'll step away from your lives entirely. My daughter-in-law reacted first tapping a celebration emoji like she had been waiting for this moment, and my son said nothing at all. Silence can cut deeper than cruelty. I stared at that screen and felt the weight of every sacrifice I had ever made for them every night, spent working late, every promise kept after their mother passed, every time I gave more than I should have, because I believed love was returned by loyalty. I was wrong. Their message was not just rejection. It was a declaration that I no longer belonged, but betrayal has a way of awakening something powerful. In a man who has been quiet too long that night, I opened my laptop, looked at the 365, looked at the $00 account they thought they controlled, and made a decision that would turn their world upside down. They dismissed me without hesitation, but they had no idea the storm that dismissal had just unleashed. Stay with me, because everything that happens next will make you rethink what a father is capable of when pushed too far. My name is Arthur Winslow. I am 70 years old, a retired structural engineer who spent 40 years designing bridges and buildings across Colorado. I built my career on precision patience and the belief that every foundation must be strong enough to weather any storm. I never imagined that the greatest storm of my life would come, not from nature or work, but from my own family. The evening began like every other evening since Eleanor passed. I stood at the kitchen counter, chopping vegetables for a dinner I would eat alone. The silence of the house pressing against me like something physical. 2 years ago, cancer took my wife of 45 years. And though I have learned to function, without her, I have never learned to stop missing her. Her photograph watches me from the mantel above the fireplace. That familiar smile frozen in time. Her eyes still carrying the warmth that made every room she entered feel like home before I started cooking. I watered her white lilies by the window. She planted them the spring before she got sick, and I have kept them alive ever since. It is more than habit. It is conversation every morning, and every evening I speak to her while the water soaks into the soil. I tell her about my day, about the weather, about the small things that would have made her laugh. Sometimes I swear I can hear her voice in the rustle of the petals, soft and sure. The way she used to say my name when she wanted my attention tonight as I sat down the watering can. I remembered her last whispered words in the hospital. She had gripped my hand with surprising strength for someone so frail and said, "Arthur, if you ever feel alone in your own family, remember that I have prepared something for you." I asked her what she meant, but she only smiled and closed her eyes. I thought it was the medication talking. I thought she was confused now. I wonder if she saw something I was too blind to see. My phone buzzed on the counter. I dried my hands and picked it up, expecting perhaps a weather alert or a reminder about a doctor's appointment instead. I saw a notification from the family group chat, the one that includes me, my son Dylan, and his wife Claudia. We rarely use it anymore. Dylan calls sometimes short conversations that feel more like obligations than connections. But a message in the group chat was unusual. I opened it. Dylan's words filled the screen, cold and clinical, as if written by a stranger dad. "We have been talking, and we have decided that you should step away for now. It is better for everyone. We need space to focus on our own family. Please understand." I read it 3 times, waiting for the sentences to rearrange themselves into something that made sense. Step away better. For everyone, the words felt like a door slamming in my face, a lock clicking into place. There was no explanation, no reason, no acknowledgement of the 70 years I have lived or the 42 years I have been his father. Then another message appeared. Claudia. She sent a single image, a celebration emoji, as if my removal from the family was something to toast. I stared at that small digital picture, and something inside me cracked, not broke, cracked. There is a difference. Broken things fall apart, cracked things hold their shape while the damage spreads beneath the surface. I knew then that those words were not Dylan's. The phrasing was too careful, too rehearsed. Dylan has never been good with words. He stumbles, pauses, fills silence with awkward laughter. This message was composed by someone who understood exactly how to wound while appearing reasonable. This was Claudia's script, and my son had simply pressed send. I thought of the first time I met her 8 years ago when Dylan brought her home for dinner. She was polished, charming, attentive, in ways that seemed almost studied. She complimented Eleanor's cooking, asked about my career, laughed at my old stories. But Eleanor had pulled me aside later that night and said something I dismissed as a mother's overprotectiveness. She seems like someone who has practiced this many times before her eyes calculate too much. I told Eleanor she was being unfair. I told her to give Claudia a chance. I wish I had listened. My thumbs hovered over the phone. I could call Dylan, demand an explanation, beg for understanding, but something in me resisted. Begging would give Claudia exactly what she wanted. It would confirm that I was desperate, weak, easily managed. Instead, I typed 5 words and pressed send, then I will step away entirely. I turned off my phone and sat in the darkness of my kitchen. The lilies glowed faintly in the last light from the window. For the first time in 45 years of marriage and fatherhood, I was completely alone, but somewhere deep inside, beneath the hurt and the shock, something else began to stir. Not grief, not surrender, something colder, something patient. The foundation of what would come next. Sleep refused to come that night, and the nights that followed, I lay in the darkness of the bedroom. Eleanor and I had shared for decades, staring at the ceiling, my mind turning over every interaction with Claudia, like a detective examining evidence at a crime scene. 8 years she had been part of our family, for 8 years, and I was only now beginning to see the shape of what she had built around us. The patterns emerged slowly, like figures stepping out of fog. I remembered how she had taken control of the family calendar almost immediately after marrying Dylan. Holiday gatherings were scheduled around her convenience. My visits to see Emma, my granddaughter, required approval that was never openly demanded but always somehow necessary. "This weekend is not good for us," she would say with that apologetic smile. "Dylan has a project, Emma has activities. Maybe next month became next season became next year." The distance between my son and me grew so gradually that I barely noticed it happening. Dylan himself had changed. The boy who used to call me every Sunday, who laughed easily and spoke his mind without hesitation, had become someone quieter, more cautious. His words grew shorter, his eyes grew duller. He began to seem less like a man living his life and more like a man watching his life happen to someone else. I had blamed work stress, the pressures of raising a child, the normal drift that happens between fathers and sons. Now I wondered if the cause was something else entirely. Someone else. I thought about the conversations we used to have and realized that Claudia was always present, always listening, always steering. If Dylan started to share something personal, she would interrupt with a question or a comment that shifted the topic. If I asked about their finances or their plans, she would answer for him slowly. Methodically, she had inserted herself between my son and everyone who might have noticed something was wrong. One memory surfaced with particular clarity. It was Christmas dinner 4 years ago. The last one Eleanor was healthy enough to host. We sat around the table laden with her famous roast and her grandmother's china, and Claudia had been unusually talkative. She spoke about her childhood, her career, her dreams for Emma's future. Then she mentioned something I had nearly forgotten until now. I lost my first husband in a car accident. She had said, her voice soft with practiced grief. That is why I treasure family so much. You never know how quickly it can be taken away. Eleanor had reached across the table and squeezed her hand. I'd felt a pang of sympathy for this woman who had suffered such tragedy before finding happiness with my son. But now, lying in my empty bed with her celebration emoji burned into my memory, I found myself asking questions I had never thought to ask. What was his name? How long were they married? Where did this accident happen? Claudia had offered no details and none of us had pressed. It seemed insensitive to ask a grieving widow to relive her pain. But was she grieving, or was she performing? The thought disturbed me enough that I got out of bed and walked to the kitchen. The clock on the stove read 2 a.m. I poured myself a glass of water and stood by the window looking out at the darkness beyond the glass. The lilies were shadows now, their white petals invisible until dawn. My phone rang. The sound was so unexpected that I nearly dropped my glass. I grabbed the phone from the counter and saw Dylan's name on the screen. My heart pounded as I answered. Dylan. What is wrong? Is Emma? Okay, silence. Heavy breathing. A long, shuddering sigh that sounded like a man trying to speak but finding no words. I waited, gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles ached. Dylan, talk to me, whatever it is you can tell me. Another breath, another sigh, then the line went dead. I stood there for a long time, the phone pressed against my ear. Even after the call ended, my son had reached out in the middle of the night, unable or unwilling to speak, and then vanished back into whatever prison he was living in. Something was trapped inside him, something he wanted to say but could not. I did not know what it was. But I knew with sudden certainty that Claudia was the reason for his silence. Sleep was impossible. After that, I went to my study and opened the old safe in the closet, the one where I keep important documents, insurance policies, the deed to the house I was looking for. Nothing in particular, just something to occupy my hands. While my mind raced, I rifled through folders and envelopes, past tax returns and warranties, and the paperwork from Eleanor's funeral. Then my fingers touched something unfamiliar at the very back of the safe, tucked behind a stack of old insurance papers. It was a bank card in a plain white envelope. The envelope was addressed to no one but Eleanor's. Handwriting covered the front in careful letters. For when the world turns cold. I pulled the card out slowly as if it might crumble in my hands. It was a simple debit card from a bank I did not recognize. Issued in Eleanor's name, I had never seen it before. She had never mentioned it in 45 years of marriage. We had shared everything, every account, every decision, every secret. Or so I thought. I held the card with trembling hands. Reading those 6 words over and over, for when the world turns cold, Eleanor had hidden this. Eleanor had prepared this. My wife, who told me everything, who trusted me with her dying breath, had kept this secret for reasons I was only beginning to imagine. She knew something was coming. She saw the storm on the horizon before I even felt the wind. But what exactly did she know, and how long had she known it? I did not sleep for the rest of that night. I sat at the kitchen table with the mysterious card in front of me, turning it over in my hand, studying every detail as if it might reveal its secrets through sheer examination. The card itself was ordinary, a simple debit card with Eleanor's name, in Boston silver letters, issued by a small regional bank I had never heard of. But the envelope it came in was anything but ordinary. Those 6 words in her handwriting haunted me. For when the world turns cold, Eleanor had known somehow. She had known when dawn finally broke through the kitchen windows, painting the lilies golden pink. I returned to the safe. I had been so startled by the card's discovery that I had not searched thoroughly now with steadier hands and clearer purpose. I removed everything from the safe and laid it on my desk behind the stack of insurance papers where the card had been hidden. I found something else, a sealed envelope thicker than the first, with my name written across the front, in Eleanor's elegant script. I held it for a long moment, feeling the weight of it, knowing that whatever was inside would change something fundamental about my understanding of my wife and my marriage. Then I broke the seal and unfolded the letter. Within the paper was cream-colored stationery, the kind Eleanor used for important correspondence. The date at the top stopped my breath. She had written this 6 months before she died, when the cancer was already spreading. But before she became too weak to write, her handwriting was still strong, then still precise. Each letter formed with the care of a woman who had spent her life teaching children to read my dearest Arthur. The letter began, "If you are reading this, then life has become unkind to you. I'm so sorry I'm not there to face it with you. But I have not left you unprotected." I had to stop and press my hand against my eyes. 2 years she had been gone, and still her voice reached across the void to comfort me. I steadied myself and continued reading. This card contains what I call our legacy fund. It is money I saved secretly for 30 years from my teaching salary. I hid it from everyone, even you, please do not be hurt by this deception. I did it because I loved you, because I saw things you could not see, and because I wanted to make sure you would have the means to stand up if you ever needed to stand alone if they turn against you. Use this to fight back. You have always been too trusting, Arthur, too willing to believe the best in people. It is one of the things I love most about you. And one of the things that worried me most, the words blurred as tears filled my eyes. 30 years, she'd been saving for 30 years, squirreling away money from her modest teacher's salary without ever telling me. I thought I knew everything about her. I thought our marriage had no secrets. But Eleanor had been building something in the shadows, preparing for a battle she somehow knew would come. The letter continued with instructions for accessing the account online. She had included the username, the password, and the security questions, all written in her careful hand. At the bottom of the page, she had added one final line. That puzzled me, even as it stirred something in my memory. "And if you need the truth, look where my heart used to rest. I love you forever, Eleanor." Where my heart used to rest. I read the phrase several times, trying to decipher its meaning. My first thought was, our bedroom, the place where she had slept beside me for 45 years? But that seemed too obvious, too simple for a woman who had hidden an entire bank account for 3 decades. I thought of our old cabin by the lake, the one we had sold 15 years ago when maintaining 2 properties became too much work. I thought of the jewelry box she kept on her nightstand, the antique wooden box with the mother-of-pearl inlay that had belonged to her grandmother. She used to say that box held the things closest to her heart. But I had looked through it after she died and found only the jewelry I expected, or had I looked carefully enough, I set aside the question. For now, first I needed to see what Eleanor had left me. I opened my laptop and navigated to the bank's website, typing the login information exactly as she had written it. The page loaded slowly, and I found myself holding my breath as I waited for the account details to appear. When the balance finally displayed on the screen, I had to grip the edge of the desk to keep from falling out of my chair. $365,000. I stared at the number, certain I was misreading it, certain there must be some mistake. But the digits remained unchanged no matter how many times I blinked. Eleanor had saved over $1. 000 every month for 30 years on a teacher's salary while we paid our mortgage and raised our son and took modest vacations and lived what I thought was a completely transparent life together. The magnitude of her foresight overwhelmed me. This was not just savings. This was not a rainy day fund or a retirement supplement. This was a war chest, a weapon she had forged in secret, dollar by dollar, year by year, against an enemy she never named, but somehow anticipated. She had seen the storm coming decades before the first clouds appeared on my horizon. I thought of Claudia's celebration emoji, of Dylan's midnight call, of the cold message that had erased me from my own family. Then, I thought of my wife dying in a hospital bed using some of her final strength to whisper a clue. I was only now beginning to understand she had prepared me for this moment. She had armed me for this fight. And somewhere in this house, in a place where her heart used to rest, she had left me something more, the truth she called it. A truth I needed to find. Eleanor's letter had given me purpose, but it had also awakened a suspicion that demanded investigation. If my wife had seen threats I could not see, then I had been blind to dangers living right under my roof. I needed to understand exactly what had been happening while I was oblivious. I needed to trace the shape of the trap that had closed around me. I started with the family joint account, the one I had opened decades ago, when Dylan was still a boy, and Eleanor and I wanted to teach him about financial responsibility. Over the years, Dylan had remained an authorized user, and after his marriage, Claudia had been added as well. It was a convenience. I had thought a way to help them if emergencies arose. Now, I wondered what else that access had enabled. I logged into the account and began scrolling through recent transactions, searching for anything unusual. What I found made my stomach turn $500 to something called Estate Planning Associates, paid 6 weeks ago. $2,200 to Family Care Consultants, paid 1 month ago. And most disturbing of all, a $5,000 deposit to a place called Sunset Haven. Senior living, dated just 2 weeks before Dylan's cold message arrived in my phone. Sunset Haven. I didn't recognize the name, but the words themselves painted a clear enough picture. Senior living, they were planning something that involved putting me somewhere. They were spending my money to arrange it. The discovery ignited something in me. A need to know everything, to see every thread of the web they had woven. I spent the next several hours digging through records I had never thought to examine: email logs, phone records, the detritus of digital life that most people ignore until they have reason to look. The evidence was damning. I found that emails I had sent to Emma over the past 2 years had been automatically redirected to spam, every single one. Birthday wishes, holiday greetings, simple notes telling her I loved her and missed her. She had never seen any of them. I had assumed she was too busy to reply, too absorbed in the life of a growing child, but she had never even received my messages. Someone with access to Dylan's email account had created filters to intercept them. Someone who did not want my granddaughter to know her grandfather was thinking of her. The phone records revealed another pattern. Every missed call from Dylan, every time I had tried to reach him and failed, corresponded with times when Claudia was home. She had been screening his calls, deciding which ones he was allowed to answer, and the birthday cards I had mailed to Emma, the ones that came back stamped undeliverable, had been sent to the correct address. I had checked and double-checked. Someone had been returning them deliberately. The pattern stretched back 2 years, 2 years of systematic isolation, 2 years of severed connections and intercepted messages and manufactured distance. And it had begun almost immediately after Eleanor died. Claudia had waited. She had watched my wife fight cancer, had attended the funeral, had held my hand and wept convincing tears. And then, with Eleanor's watchful eye finally closed, she had begun her campaign to erase me from my own family. The realization struck me with the force of a physical blow. This was not a sudden decision born from some recent conflict. This was a long-term conspiracy, executed with patience and precision. Claudia had spent 2 years building walls between me and everyone I loved, and I had blamed myself for the growing distance. I had thought I was failing as a father and grandfather. I had thought the fault was mine. But I had been the target of something deliberate, something calculated, something that had waited for my wife to die before revealing its true face. Eleanor had seen it even as she was dying. She had seen what I could not. That was why she created the legacy fund. That was why she left me. Clues she knew that without her protection, I would be vulnerable to whatever Claudia was planning. I turned back to the joint account and felt the cold determination from that first night crystallize into action. The account was in my name. Dylan and Claudia were authorized users, nothing more. I had given them access out of trust and generosity, and they had used it to fund their schemes against me. With a few clicks, I revoked their authorization. Their access disappeared. Whatever plans they had made with my money would now require new funding. I logged out and sat back, waiting for what I knew would come. I didn't have to wait long. Within minutes, my phone began buzzing with notifications, missed calls from Claudia, one after another, each more frantic than the last. In 12 minutes, she called 23 times. The screen lit up again and again, with her name demanding attention, demanding answers, demanding that I respond to her summons. I watched the phone vibrate across the table, then I smiled a cold smile. That would have surprised anyone who knew me as the gentle retired engineer who watered his wife's lilies and never raised his voice. I picked up the phone and set it face down on the table, silencing the screen for the first time in 2 years. I felt something I had almost forgotten how to feel. I felt in control. 3 days passed in a strange kind of suspended animation. I barely left the house, barely ate, barely slept. I spent my hours poring over financial records and email logs, building a case file of evidence that grew thicker with each passing day. The outside world faded into irrelevance. There was only the investigation, only the growing certainty that I had been the victim of something far more sinister than family estrangement on the fourth morning. A knock at the front door startled me from my research. I approached cautiously, half expecting to find Claudia on my doorstep with threats or demands. Instead, I found Marjorie Clark holding a covered pot and wearing an expression of gentle concern. Marjorie was 68 years old, a retired psychiatric nurse who had lived next door for nearly 15 years. She and Eleanor had been close friends, sharing coffee on weekend mornings and gardening tips in the spring. Since Eleanor's death, Marjorie had checked on me occasionally, bringing casseroles and quiet company when she sensed I needed it. I had always appreciated her kindness, but kept her at a polite distance, unwilling to burden anyone with my grief. "I noticed you haven't been outside in days," she said, holding up the pot. "Chicken soup. My grandmother's recipe. It fixes everything from broken bones to broken hearts." Something in her voice, some combination of warmth and steadiness, broke through the walls I had built. I invited her in, and before I knew what was happening, I was telling her everything. The message from Dylan, the celebration emoji, the isolation pattern I had discovered, the mysterious transactions, the legacy fund Eleanor had hidden for 30 years. The words poured out of me like water through a cracked dam, and Marjorie listened without interruption, her eyes never leaving my face. When I finally fell silent, she reached across the table and took my hand. "Arthur, I need you to hear something. They did not push you out. They freed you as long as you were trying to maintain the relationship. You were vulnerable. You were holding back, protecting feelings that did not deserve protection. Now you can fight without worrying about hurting anyone. Now you can do what needs to be done." Her words struck me with unexpected force. She was right. I had been so focused on the pain of rejection that I had not considered its liberation. I was no longer bound by the need to preserve family harmony. I was free to pursue the truth wherever it led. Marjorie leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. "There is something else I should tell you. Something I have noticed about Dylan. He has not seemed right for months. Whenever I see him at the grocery store or around town, his eyes are vacant. His responses are slow. There is an emotional flatness to him that disturbs me. I was a psychiatric nurse for 30 years. Arthur, I have seen those symptoms before. They are consistent with someone on high-dose sedatives. The suggestion hit me like a punch to the chest. I thought of Dylan's midnight call, his heavy breathing, his inability to speak. I thought of how he had faded over the years, becoming quieter and more absent. Could Claudia be drugging him? Could she be chemically suppressing whatever resistance he might otherwise offer? Marjorie continued, her voice dropping slightly. There is one more thing. One more. Last week, I saw Claudia at the coffee shop downtown. She was sitting with a man in a white coat, a doctor. I assumed they were looking at papers and discussing something very seriously. At the time, I thought perhaps Emma was sick and they were reviewing medical records. But now, knowing what you have told me, I wonder if there was another explanation. A Dr. Paper's serious discussion, my mind flashed to the $5,000 deposit to Sunset Haven Senior Living. The pieces were beginning to connect in ways that chilled me. I thanked Marjorie for everything, for the soup, for listening, for the observations that confirmed my darkest suspicions after she left. I sat for a long time thinking about my next move. I needed professional help. I needed someone who understood the legal landscape of what I was facing. Eleanor had mentioned an attorney years ago, a man named Richard Vaughn who specialized in elder law. She had met him at a community seminar and been impressed by his knowledge and integrity. At the time, I had filed the information away as unnecessary. Now I dug through my papers until I found his business card, yellowed with age but still legible. I called his office and explained that I was facing a family situation involving potential financial abuse and possible guardianship issues. His receptionist put me through immediately, and Richard agreed to meet that afternoon. I gathered every document I had collected over the past few days, the bank statements, the transaction records, the email logs, and drove to his office with my heart pounding. Richard Vaughn was 55, with silver-streaked hair and eyes that projected both intelligence and compassion. He listened carefully as I explained my situation, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. Then he began reviewing the documents I'd brought, his expression growing darker with each page he turned. Finally, he looked up at me with an expression I could not read. "Arthur, we have a serious problem. These loan documents have your signature on them, 5 separate loans totaling nearly $300. 0, all secured against your property." He held up one of the papers, pointing to the signature line. "But you are telling me you never signed them." I stared at the signature. Richard was pointing to my own name, written in what appeared to be my own handwriting, but I knew with absolute certainty that my hand had never touched that pen. I had never seen this document before. I had never agreed to any loan secured against my property. Someone had forged my signature, and there was only one person who had both the access and the motive to do so. I never signed that. I said, my voice steady, despite the fury building in my chest. I never signed any of them. I didn't even know these loans existed until I started investigating my own accounts 3 days ago. Richard nodded slowly, his expression grim. "That is what I was afraid you would say." He spread the 5 documents across his desk, each one bearing my forged signature, each one representing a debt I had never agreed to carry. These loans total $280, 0. Arthur, all taken out over the past 18 months, all secured against assets that belong to you. He walked me through each document methodically. The first was a second mortgage on the family home, the house I'd co-owned with Dylan since Eleanor and I added his name to the deed 15 years ago. As part of our estate planning, the second and third loans had been used to invest in something called Reed Consulting LLC, which Richard's preliminary research revealed to be a company registered in Claudia's name, a company that had filed for bankruptcy 6 months ago after hemorrhaging money on expenses that remained suspiciously vague. The fourth and fifth loans had been converted to cash withdrawals that left no trail under Colorado law. Richard continued forging someone's signature on a financial document is a Class 5 felony. It carries a penalty of 1 to 3 years in prison. If we can prove that Claudia forged these signatures, and I believe she faces serious criminal consequences. The words hung in the air between us. Part of me recoiled from the idea of sending my son's wife to prison. But another part, the part that had been awakened by Eleanor's letter and hardened by Claudia's betrayal, understood that this was no longer a family dispute. This was fraud. This was theft. This was a crime committed against me by someone who had smiled at my dinner table and called me Dad. Richard set down the loan documents and picked up a different file. There is something else you should know. I have been conducting preliminary research into Claudia's background, and I found some irregularities. Her history has a 3-year gap before she moved to Colorado and met your son. She lived in Arizona and she was married before I thought of the Christmas dinner. Claudia's soft voice speaking of loss and tragedy. She mentioned a first husband once. She said he died in a car accident. Richard nodded. His name was Victor Morrison. He died 5 years ago, about a year before Claudia appeared. In Colorado, I'm still digging into the circumstances, but what I have found so far is concerning enough that I wanted you to be aware. I authorized him to investigate everything. Eleanor's suspicion of Claudia had not been maternal overprotectiveness or unfounded paranoia. It had been intuition, the instinct of a woman who spent her life reading people and recognizing when something was wrong. If my wife had seen darkness behind Claudia's polished smile, then I needed to understand exactly what that darkness contained. I drove home in a daze, my mind churning through the implications of what I had learned: forgery, fraud, a failed company, funded with stolen money, a mysterious first husband whose death had been convenient enough to mention, but vague enough to avoid scrutiny. The woman who had married my son was not who she claimed to be. She was something else entirely, something dangerous, and I had welcomed her into my family with open arms that evening as I sat in the kitchen watching darkness fall. Over Eleanor's lilies, my phone rang. Richard's name appeared on the screen. I answered immediately. Arthur, I found Victor Morrison's death record. Richard's voice was tight-controlled, the voice of a man delivering news. He wished he did not have to share. He died in a single car accident on a mountain road outside Flagstaff, Arizona. His brakes failed. He went over a guardrail and down a 300-foot embankment. He was 63 years old, recently retired from a career in pharmaceutical sales. And here's the part that concerns me most. I gripped the phone tighter, bracing myself 6 weeks before his death. Victor Morrison changed his will. He removed his sister and nephew as beneficiaries and made Claudia the sole inheritor of his entire estate. She received everything: his house, his retirement accounts, his life insurance over $400, $000 in total. The police investigated and ruled it an accident brake failure. Mountain road, tragic but explainable. Richard paused, but his family never believed it. His sister filed a complaint with the prosecutor's office, alleging foul play. The case was reviewed and closed due to insufficient evidence, but she has never stopped believing that Claudia killed her brother. The revelation about Victor Morrison kept me awake through another sleepless night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind constructing and reconstructing the pattern of Claudia's life. A first husband who died conveniently after changing his will, a second husband who had become a hollow shell of the man he once was, and now a father-in-law being systematically erased from his own family while mysterious payments flowed to something called Sunset Haven Senior Living. By morning, I knew what I had to do. I needed to understand exactly what Claudia had planned for me. I found the phone number for Sunset Haven online and dialed, my heart pounding as I prepared to play a role I had never imagined, playing a pleasant female voice answered Sunset Haven Sr. Living, this is Patricia. How may I help you today? I steadied my voice and adopted a tone of casual inquiry. Good morning, my name is Arthur Winslow. I understand someone may have contacted you about residential arrangements on my behalf, and I wanted to confirm the details. There was a brief pause, the sound of typing, and then Patricia's voice returned warm and helpful. Oh yes, Mr. Winslow, your daughter-in-law has been in touch with us several times. She explained your situation, the memory problems, and the difficulty managing daily tasks. She was very concerned about your safety living alone. She even sent over a doctor's assessment documenting your condition. We have a lovely room reserved for you starting next month. It has a garden view, just like she requested. My blood ran cold. Memory problems, difficulty managing daily tasks, a doctor's assessment. None of it was true. I had no memory problems. I managed my daily life with the same confidence I had maintained for 70 years, and I had certainly never seen any doctor who would have produced such an assessment. I thanked Patricia and ended the call, my hands trembling with a combination of rage and fear. This was not simply about pushing me away or stealing my money. This was about erasing me entirely. Claudia was preparing to have me declared mentally incompetent, to institutionalize me against my will, to seize legal control over every aspect of my existence, my freedom, my finances, my dignity, my very identity as a functioning human being. She wanted it all. I called Richard immediately and relayed what I had learned. His response confirmed my worst fears. She is building a guardianship case. He said, his voice tight with controlled anger under Colorado law. If someone can convince a court that an elderly person is unable to manage their own affairs, that person can be appointed as guardian with complete legal authority over the ward. It sounds like Claudia has found a compliant doctor willing to create false medical records supporting her claims if she succeeds in getting a court to grant guardianship. Arthur, you lose everything: the right to manage your own money, the right to choose where you live, the right to make your own medical decisions. She would control your entire existence. The words hit me like hammer blows. I thought of Victor Morrison, dead on a mountain road. 6 weeks after changing his will? I thought of Dylan, hollow-eyed and silent, unable to speak, even when he called me in the middle of the night. And I thought of myself trapped in a nursing home room with a garden view, legally stripped of every freedom I had ever known. While Claudia smiled and collected whatever remained of my assets, what can we do? I asked. Richard's response was immediate and decisive. We fight back. First, we establish a living trust that protects your assets from any guardianship proceeding. Second, we request an independent psychiatric evaluation from a court-approved doctor, someone with no connection to Claudia or her schemes. When that evaluation confirms what we already know, that you are mentally competent and fully capable of managing your own affairs, her case collapses. Third, we begin formally documenting her pattern of financial abuse. The forgeries, the unauthorized transactions, the payments to Sunset Haven. We build a record that shows exactly who is victimizing whom. In this situation, I authorized him to proceed with all of it, whatever it cost. Whatever it required, I would not allow Claudia to steal my freedom the way she had apparently stolen Victor Morrison's life and Dylan's will. That night, exhausted but too wired to sleep, I sat in the kitchen with Eleanor's photograph watching over me. The lilies needed water, but I could not summon the energy to rise. I simply sat, letting the silence of the house wrap around me like a familiar blanket. My phone buzzed with an incoming message I glanced at, the screen expecting another barrage from Claudia. Instead, I saw a notification from an unfamiliar source, a message from Emma's tablet. I opened it with trembling fingers. The words were spelled imperfectly, typed by small hands that had not yet mastered the keyboard, but their meaning was unmistakable. Grandpa, why does Mommy tell everyone you're sick? You're not sick. You helped me with math last week on the phone. Is Mommy lying? I love you. Grandpa, tears streamed down my face as I read the message again and again. My 10-year-old granddaughter, the only innocent in this entire nightmare, had seen through her mother's lies. She remembered our phone call about her math homework. She knew I was not sick. She knew something was wrong. Emma was the only one in the family who still saw the truth. And in that moment, protecting her became as important as protecting myself. Emma's message stayed with me. Through another restless night, my granddaughter had reached out to me despite everything her mother had done. To sever our connection, she had seen through the lies. She still loved me. And she was trapped in that house with a woman capable of forgery fraud, and possibly worse. I could not sit in my kitchen waiting for Richard to build a legal case while Emma lived under the same roof as a predator. By morning, I'd made my decision. I was going to confront Claudia directly. I needed to see Dylan with my own eyes. I needed Emma to know that her grandfather had not abandoned her. And perhaps in some corner of my mind, I hoped that facing Claudia would shake loose whatever remained of my son's buried conscience. I drove to their house without calling ahead. The neighborhood looked the same as it always had: comfortable homes with manicured lawns, the kind of place where families were supposed to thrive. Dylan and Claudia had moved here 6 years ago, shortly after Emma was born. Eleanor and I had helped with the down payment. We had celebrated holidays in that house, birthdays, ordinary Sunday dinners that now felt like memories from another lifetime. I parked at the curb and walked up the front path, my heart pounding, but my resolve firm. I rang the doorbell and waited. Footsteps approached from inside, and then the door opened to reveal Claudia. She was dressed impeccably. As always, her hair perfect, her makeup flawless, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. But when she saw me standing on her doorstep, that smile vanished instantly. "You are not welcome here anymore," she said, her voice cold and flat. "You are upsetting our family with your paranoid behavior. Dylan and I have discussed it, and we think it is best if you stay away until you get the help you need." I looked past her into the hallway. Dylan stood several feet behind her, partially obscured by shadows. What I saw made my stomach clench. He was pale, almost gray. His posture slumped, his eyes unfocused and empty. He looked like a man who had not slept in weeks, or perhaps like a man who had been sleeping too much, chemically subdued into compliance. Marjorie had been right. Something was terribly wrong with my son Dylan. I said, trying to make eye contact over Claudia's shoulder. "Can we talk, just the two of us?" Claudia shifted to block my view. "He does not want to talk to you." "No one in this family does. You need to leave before I call the police." I was about to respond when something on her hand caught my attention. A ring. A familiar ring with a small diamond surrounded by tiny sapphires. A ring I had given to Eleanor on our 25th anniversary. The ring she had worn every day until the day she died. "Where did you get that?" My voice came out harder than I intended, edged with a fury I could barely contain. Claudia glanced at her hand, then back at me with a smile that was almost pitying. "Eleanor gave it to me before she died. She wanted me to have it. She said it would be safer with me than sitting in some dusty drawer collecting tarnish." The lie was so brazen, so casually delivered that for a moment I could not speak. Eleanor would never have given away her wedding ring. She had told me 100 times that she wanted to be buried wearing it, that it represented everything we had built together, that it would go with her into whatever came next. I had honored that wish. I had placed the ring on her finger myself before the funeral home closed the casket. But when I had visited her grave on the first anniversary of her death, the funeral director had mentioned that the ring had been removed before burial at the family's request. At the time, I had assumed it was a misunderstanding. Now I understood Claudia had taken it. She had stolen my wife's wedding ring from her body through the doorway behind Claudia. I caught a glimpse of the living room. What I saw there added another layer of horror to this nightmare. Eleanor's portrait. The one that had hung above our fireplace for 40 years before I gave it to Dylan, after her death had been turned face down on a side table. Claudia hated my wife so much that she could not even bear to see her face watching over the family she had helped create Grandpa. The cry came from inside the house, and suddenly Emma was pushing past her mother's legs, running toward me with her arms outstretched. I knelt to catch her, wrapping her in a hug that I wished could last forever. She was 10 years old, small for her age, with her grandmother's dark eyes and her father's gentle smile. "I got your message," I whispered into her hair. "I love you too, sweetheart. I love you so much." Claudia's hand closed around Emma's arm like a vice. She yanked the girl backward, with enough force to make her stumble, then shoved her toward the interior of the house. "Go to your room. Emma, now." Emma looked back at me with tears streaming down her face as she disappeared into the hallway. Claudia turned back to me. Her expression venomous: "Leave now, or I will have you arrested for trespassing." I stood my ground for one more moment. I looked past Claudia to where Dylan still stood in the shadows, motionless, watching this scene unfold without a word of protest or support. I locked eyes with my son and spoke directly to him, ignoring his wife entirely. "Dylan, if you still remember who you are, look carefully at the person you were living with. Look at what she is doing to this family. Look at what she is doing to you." Something flickered in Dylan's empty eyes, a flinch, a tremor. The smallest crack in the wall that Claudia had built around him for just an instant. I saw my son in there, buried but not gone fighting to surface through whatever fog she had wrapped around his mind. Then Claudia slammed the door in my face. I drove home in silence, my hands gripping the steering wheel, my mind replaying every detail of that encounter. Dylan's vacant stare, Eleanor's ring on Claudia's finger, the portrait turned face down, Emma's desperate hug, and the tears on her cheeks. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled over to check it, expecting another threatening message from Claudia. Instead, I saw a text from an unknown number. The area code was local, matching Dylan's phone. The message contained only 5 words: "Dad, don't give up." I stared at the screen as tears blurred my vision. My son was still in there, somewhere beneath the sedatives and the manipulation and the years of psychological control. Dylan was still alive, and he was trying to signal for help. Dylan's message gave me something I had not felt in weeks: hope. My son was fighting against whatever Claudia had done to him, struggling to reach through the fog that surrounded his mind. If he could send that message, perhaps he could find the strength to do more. Perhaps there was still a chance to save him. 2 days later, Richard called with news that would change everything I thought I understood about my enemy. I found Victor Morrison's sister. He said her name is Linda Morrison. She is 65 years old, lives in Phoenix. And she has been waiting 5 years for someone to believe her about Claudia. She agreed to speak with you directly. I think you need to hear this from her. Richard arranged a conference call that afternoon when Linda Morrison's voice came through the line. It trembled with a mixture of old grief and fresh anger that told me she had carried this burden alone for far too long. "Thank you for talking to me." I said, "I know this must be difficult." "Difficult does not begin to describe it," Linda replied, "but if there is any chance that what I tell you might stop that woman from destroying another family, then I will talk for as long as you need." She told me about her brother Victor. He had been 58 when he met Claudia at an investment seminar in Scottsdale. Recently divorced after 30 years of marriage, lonely, vulnerable, desperately seeking the companionship he had lost. Claudia had been 35, beautiful, attentive, full of admiration for his success in pharmaceutical sales. She had made him feel young again, valued again, alive again. Within 2 years they were married. Linda continued. "I went to the wedding. I wanted to be happy for him, but something about her felt wrong. She was too perfect, too polished, too focused on Victor's finances. When I tried to talk to him about it, he said I was being jealous and overprotective. The parallels to my own family were devastating. Eleanor had seen the same things in Claudia that Linda had seen, and like Linda, she had been dismissed as overprotective within 5 years. He was dead. Linda said, her voice cracking. He was driving home from a golf trip in the mountains outside Flagstaff. His brakes failed on a steep curve. He went through the guardrail and down a 300-foot cliff. The police said it was an accident. Brake lines can deteriorate. Mountain roads are dangerous. She paused to collect herself before continuing. 6 weeks before he died. Victor changed his will. He removed me and my son as beneficiaries and made Claudia the sole inheritor of everything his house, his retirement accounts, his life insurance over $400. 00. She collected it all and disappeared within months. The time I tried to file a civil suit, she had moved to Colorado and changed her name back to her maiden name. The police reviewed the case at my request, but said there was insufficient evidence to reopen the investigation. I sat in silence, absorbing the full horror of what Linda was telling me. Claudia had done this before. She had targeted a lonely older man, married him, isolated him from his family, and then profited from his death. Victor Morrison was not an isolated tragedy. He was part of a pattern, and that pattern suddenly made everything clear. Claudia had not married Dylan because she loved him. She had married him because he was the son of a man with assets, a man approaching 70, a man whose wife was dying of cancer. Dylan was never the target. He was the delivery mechanism, a weak-willed intermediary who could be controlled and manipulated, while Claudia positioned herself to inherit everything I had spent my life building. I'm so sorry for what happened to your brother, I said to Linda, and I'm sorry. No one believed you. You believe me now. She replied, that is what matters. You are our last chance for justice. Mr. Winslow, my brother deserves peace. And your son deserves to know what kind of monster he married, whatever you need from me. Testimony documents, anything I will provide it, just promise me you will stop her before she does to your family what she did to mine, I promised. After the call ended, I sat alone in my study, my mind churning through the implications of everything I had learned. Eleanor's words echoed in my memory, where my heart used to rest. She had left me clues. Breadcrumbs leading to something more than the legacy fund. She had mentioned the truth. She had said I would need it, where my heart used to rest. I thought of our bedroom, our cabin, the places we had been happiest together. Then, I thought of the one object Eleanor had kept closer than anything else. The antique jewelry box with the mother-of-pearl inlay that had belonged to her grandmother. She kept it on her nightstand within arm's reach of her pillow every night for 45 years. Her hand would brush across its surface before she fell asleep. That was where her heart rested. I went to the bedroom and retrieved the box from its place on Eleanor's nightstand. I had looked through it after her death, finding the jewelry I expected, the pieces I had given her over the decades, but I had not examined the box itself. Now I did. I ran my fingers along the velvet lining, pressing gently, searching for anything unusual near the back corner. I felt something give a hidden latch invisible unless you were looking for it. I pressed harder, and a secret compartment opened beneath the velvet. Inside was a USB drive and a folded letter. In Eleanor's handwriting, my wife had left more than money. She had left evidence. My hands trembled as I unfolded Eleanor's letter. The paper was the same cream-colored stationery she had used for the first letter, the one that came with the legacy card. But this letter was longer, and the handwriting showed signs of fatigue, as if she had written it during one of her weaker days. Near the end. My dearest Arthur, it began. If you found this, then the worst has happened. I hoped you would never need to read these words. I prayed that my suspicions were wrong, that Claudia was simply a difficult daughter-in-law, rather than something darker, but I prepared for the worst, because that is what love does. It protects even when protection seems unnecessary. I had to stop and wipe my eyes before I could continue reading. I've been investigating Claudia for 3 years, ever since I noticed her slowly isolating you from our family. The missed calls that were never returned. The visits that were always inconvenient. The way Dylan grew quieter and more distant each time we saw him, I recognized the pattern because I spent my career watching children and families. I know what manipulation looks like. I know how predators operate. 3 years Eleanor had been investigating Claudia for 3 years, even as cancer was spreading through her body. Even as she was preparing to say goodbye to the life we had built together, she had used her remaining strength to protect me. Everything I discovered is on the USB drive in this compartment. It is not complete. I ran out of time before I could finish, but it should be enough to help you understand what you are dealing with and who Claudia really is. I'm sorry I did not tell you while I was alive. I did not want to break your heart over suspicions that might have been wrong. I did not want our last months together to be consumed by conflict and accusation. But if you are reading this now, then you need the truth more than you need. My protection, fight my love. Fight for yourself and for Dylan. I am with you always, Eleanor. I clutched the letter to my chest and wept. My wife had spent her dying days building a shield around me, gathering evidence against a woman she recognized as dangerous, preparing for a battle she knew she would not live to fight even in death. She was still protecting me, even from the grave. She was still my partner when I could breathe again. I inserted the USB drive into my laptop. The contents appeared on screen, organized into folders with Eleanor's characteristic precision. The first folder contained Claudia's marriage certificate to Victor Morrison, dated 8 years ago, in Maricopa County, Arizona. The second folder held news articles about Victor's death, each one describing the tragic accident on the mountain road, the brake failure, the 300-foot drop. The third folder contained email exchanges between members of the Morrison family discussing their suspicions about Claudia, their frustration with the police investigation, their eventual resignation to the fact that they could not prove what they believed. The fourth folder held financial records, bank statements showing Claudia's accounts before and after Victor's death. The inheritance flowing in, the spending flowing out, and then 6 months after Victor's death, a change of address to Colorado, she had cashed in her gains and moved on to find her next victim. My son, the fifth folder, contained only one file, a video file with a padlock icon indicating password protection. I tried to open it, entering every combination. I could think of our wedding anniversary, Eleanor's birthday, Dylan's birthday, Emma's birthday. The date we bought our house, the date Eleanor was diagnosed, nothing worked. The video remained locked, its contents hidden behind a password. I could not guess Eleanor had protected this file more carefully than anything else, whatever it contained. She wanted me to find it at the right time when I was ready. When I needed it most. For now, it would remain a mystery. Another breadcrumb on the trail she had left for me. I gathered everything, the letters, the USB drive, the jewelry box, and drove to Richard's office. He spent 2 hours reviewing the materials, his expression growing more grave with each file he opened. When he finally looked up, his eyes met mine with a weight that told me we had reached a turning point. "Arthur, this is a complete case," he said. "Forgery, elder, financial abuse, fraudulent guardianship attempt, and now evidence of a pattern targeting older men. Your wife was thorough. She gave us everything we need to destroy Claudia Reed, legally speaking." He leaned forward, his hands folded on the desk. "But before we proceed, I need to know what you want. This is not just about winning a court case. This is about your family, your son, your granddaughter. If we go forward with criminal charges, Claudia will fight back. She will try to turn Dylan against you. She will use Emma as leverage. It will be ugly and painful and public." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "So I need you to tell me, Arthur, what do you want from this? Do you want revenge? The satisfaction of seeing her suffer for what she has done? Or do you want justice? The harder path that focuses on stopping her and protecting the people you love?" I did not hesitate. The answer had been forming inside me since the moment I read Eleanor's letter, since the moment I understood the depth of her sacrifice and the breadth of her love. "Justice," I said, "and my son back. That is what I want." Whatever it takes. The weeks that followed were a master class in methodical execution. Richard and I worked together like engineers, dismantling a faulty structure, removing one support beam at a time until the entire edifice became unstable. Every action was calculated, every move designed to cut off another avenue of escape. While building our case stronger, the living trust was established first. Richard drafted documents that transferred all my assets into a protective structure that Claudia could not touch, regardless of any guardianship preceding my house, my savings, Eleanor's legacy fund. Everything I had built over 70 years was now shielded behind legal walls that would take years to breach, even if she somehow convinced a court to grant her control over my person. Next came the formal complaint to the Colorado Attorney General's Elder Abuse Unit. Richard prepared a comprehensive package documenting the forged loan documents, the unauthorized transactions, the payments to Sunset Haven, and the fraudulent medical assessment Claudia had submitted to the nursing home. The complaint was thorough, professional, and devastating. An investigator called within 3 days to schedule an interview. Finally, we sent an anonymous tip to Claudia's employer, a regional marketing firm where she held a mid-level management position. The tip suggested that company resources email accounts work hours, and office equipment had been used to conduct personal financial schemes unrelated to company business. It was enough to trigger an internal investigation. The effects rippled outward faster than I had anticipated. Within 2 weeks, Claudia's carefully constructed world began to collapse. I learned about her unraveling through Richard's contacts and through Marjorie, who kept her ear to the neighborhood gossip with the dedication of a retired nurse who had spent decades reading people. The joint account I had closed was apparently the foundation of Claudia's financial house of cards. Without access to it, she could not make the payments she had committed to the mortgage company, rejected her refinancing application, because I had formally withdrawn my consent as co-owner of the property. Her employer suspended her pending the results of their internal investigation. Credit card companies began calling the house at all hours, demanding payments on accounts that were suddenly catastrophically overdue. As I watched her empire crumble, I began to understand the full depth of what Eleanor had done for me. My wife had not simply left me money in evidence. She had created a complete defense system, a fortress designed to protect me from exactly this kind of attack. The legacy fund gave me resources to fight the hidden evidence, gave me weapons to use the trust structure Richard built followed guidelines Eleanor had researched and bookmarked on her computer files. I found when I finally thought to search her old laptop. She had spent her final years preparing for a war she knew was coming, spilling walls around me even as her own body was failing. Eleanor knew she was dying. She knew she would not be there to protect me herself. So she did the next best thing. She gave me the tools to protect myself and trusted me to find them when I needed them most. The realization brought fresh tears to my eyes every time I thought about it. Even in death, my wife was still fighting for me. My phone rang on a Thursday evening. Claudia's name appeared on the screen. I considered ignoring it, but something made me answer. I wanted to hear her voice. I wanted to know what desperation sounded like. "What are you doing?" she demanded, her voice cracking between rage and terror. "You are destroying everything. This is our family, Dylan's family, Emma's future. How can you be so cruel? I let her words wash over me without effect. There was a time when such an appeal might have moved me, might have made me doubt myself, might have convinced me to back down for the sake of family peace. The time had passed. You destroyed this family the day you started planning. I replied, my voice cold and steady. The forgeries, the nursing home, the scheme to have me declared incompetent. You set all of this in motion years ago. I'm just finishing what my wife prepared. I hung up before she could respond. That night, something happened in Dylan's house that I would not learn about until later. But when I did learn about it, I understood that the tide had finally begun to turn. Dylan came home late from wherever he had been spending his days since Claudia's suspension. Emma ran to greet him at the door, throwing her arms around his waist with the unconditional love that only a child can offer. And then she asked him a question that shattered whatever walls Claudia had built around his conscience. Daddy, why does Mommy say, Grandpa is sick? Grandpa is not sick. He helped me with my homework on the phone last week. We talked about fractions. He explained them better than my teacher. She looked up at her father with innocent eyes that demanded truth. Is Mommy lying? Dylan looked down at his daughter's face, at the confusion and trust warring in her expression. And something inside him finally broke the sedatives, the manipulation, the years of psychological control. None of it could withstand the simple honesty of a child asking why the adults in her life could not tell the truth. For the first time in years, my son began to cry 3 days after Emma's question broke through Dylan's walls. My doorbell rang at 7 in the morning. I was already awake, sitting in the kitchen with coffee and Eleanor's photograph, as had become my habit during these weeks of waiting and planning. I rose and walked to the front door without urgency, expecting perhaps Marjorie with another pot of soup or Richard with another stack of documents. What I found on my doorstep made me forget how to breathe. Dylan stood there thinner than I had ever seen him, his clothes wrinkled as if he had slept in them, dark circles carved beneath his eyes. But those eyes themselves were different. For the first time in years, they held clarity. The vacant stare was gone, replaced by something sharper, more present. More like the son I remembered from before Claudia entered our lives. Dad? He said, his voice rough with exhaustion and emotion. Can I come in? I stepped aside without a word and let him enter. He walked into the kitchen and stopped when he saw Eleanor's photograph on the table. His mother's face, watching over the room where we had shared so many meals as a family. His shoulders began to shake, and I thought he might collapse right there on the kitchen floor. I guided him to a chair and sat down across from him, waiting for him to find the words he had come to say. It took several minutes when he finally spoke. His voice cracked with every sentence I have. Known something was wrong for a long time, he began. But I was scared of losing Emma, losing the house, losing everything I thought I had built. Claudia controlled me with fear, and I let her because I did not know how to fight back. And then there were the vitamins. He laughed bitterly at the word. She told me they were supplements for stress, natural remedies to help me sleep and stay calm. I trusted her. I took them every day for 2 years. Dad, 2 years of walking through fog, unable to think clearly, unable to feel anything strongly enough to act on it. I was a zombie in my own life. Marjorie's observation echoed in my memory. High-dose sedatives. Claudia had been drugging her own husband to keep him compliant to ensure he would not interfere with her plans. But when Emma asked me if her mother was lying, Dylan continued, something broke inside me. I could not lie to my daughter. I could not look into her eyes and tell her that everything was fine when I knew it was not. So I stopped taking the pills. The withdrawal was brutal, but after 3 days, the fog started to lift, and I started to remember who I was. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a phone, an older model I did not recognize. I recorded this last week. He said, his hand trembling as he held it out to me. I needed to know the truth for myself. I needed to hear her say it. I took the phone and pressed play. Claudia's voice filled the kitchen, cold and calculating every word a confession. Dylan, listen to me once your father is in the facility. We control everything, the house, his savings, all of it. We will finally have the security we deserve. And if you do not cooperate, if you try to warn him or interfere, I will do the same thing to you. Do not think I will not. Victor thought he could stand up to me too. Look how that ended. The recording stopped. Silence filled the room. Dylan stared at the table, unable to meet my eyes. She killed him, he whispered. Victor Morrison. She as much as admitted it, and she would have done the same to you. Maybe to me too. Eventually I set the phone down and moved around the table to where my son sat, broken and ashamed. I pulled him to his feet and wrapped my arms around him, the first real embrace we had shared in years. He collapsed against me, sobbing like the little boy he used to be when he scraped his knee or lost a baseball game. You're not a bad person, Dylan. I said into his hair. You were lost. She made sure you were lost. But you found your way home. That is what matters now. We stood there for a long time, father and son reconnected after years of manufactured distance, when Dylan finally pulled back. His eyes were red, but clear. There is something else, he said. Something I need to tell you? Mom's ring, the one Claudia wears. She took it from the jewelry box the day after the funeral. I saw her do it. I was standing in the doorway and I watched her open the box and slip it onto her finger, but I was already so deep under her control that I could not find the strength to stop her. I'm so sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry I let her take it. The confirmation of what I had suspected sent a fresh wave of grief through me, but I did not let it show. Dylan needed strength from me now, not sorrow. What do I do now? He asked, his voice small and lost. How do I fix this? I placed my hands on his shoulders and looked directly into his eyes, the eyes that finally looked back at me with recognition and love. You testify, I said firmly, in court under oath. You tell them everything, the drugs, the threats, the recording. You take Emma somewhere safe away from Claudia, where she cannot use your daughter as leverage. And you help me end this together as father and son. We finish what your mother started. Dylan nodded, tears streaming down his face. I will, he said, I promise. 2 months passed in a blur of preparation. Dylan moved into my house with Emma, filing for legal separation from Claudia and obtaining a temporary custody order that kept our granddaughter safe while the legal machinery ground forward. Richard assembled our case with the precision of a surgeon preparing for a complex operation. Each piece of evidence cataloged and organized, each witness prepared and rehearsed. The Attorney General's office opened a formal investigation based on our complaint, and finally the date arrived for the guardianship hearing that Claudia had initiated months ago, back when she believed her plan was proceeding flawlessly. The Jefferson County Courthouse stood solid and imposing under a gray November sky. I walked through its doors, with Dylan on one side and Richard on the other, feeling stronger than I had in years. Eleanor's photograph was in my breast pocket close to my heart. I wanted her with me. For this moment, the courtroom was smaller than I had expected, wood-paneled and formal, with the judge's bench elevated above the rest of the room. I took my seat at the respondent's table and watched as Claudia entered through a side door. She had dressed carefully for the occasion, a soft blue dress that made her look gentle, and maternal, minimal makeup that emphasized the circles under her eyes, a tissue clutched in her hand, ready to dab at tears that would come on cue. She was playing a role the concerned daughter-in-law forced into an impossible situation, and she played it beautifully. Her opening statement dripped with rehearsed emotion. "I only wanted to protect my father-in-law." She told the judge, her voice quavering. "Arthur has become confused and vulnerable. Since my mother-in-law passed away, he makes irrational financial decisions. He has turned against his own family. Certain people are manipulating him, taking advantage of his grief and his age. I filed this petition because I love him, and I am terrified of what might happen. If he continues down this path, I watched the judge's face for any sign of sympathy. Her expression remained neutral, professionally impassive. She had seen performances like this before. Then it was our turn. Richard presented our evidence, systematically building a wall of facts that Claudia's tears could not penetrate. First came the independent psychiatric evaluation conducted by a court-approved physician with no connection to either party. The results were unambiguous. My cognitive function tested above average for my age group. My memory was sharp. My decision-making capacity was fully intact. There was no medical basis whatsoever for a finding of incompetence. Next came the forgery expert, a retired FBI document analyst who had examined the loan papers bearing my alleged signature. His testimony was devastating. The signatures were definitely not mine. They showed hesitation marks and pressure, inconsistencies, characteristic of someone attempting to copy another person's handwriting. Whoever had signed those documents had committed textbook forgery. Richard then presented the financial crime documentation, the pattern of unauthorized transactions, the payments to Sunset Haven Sr., living the fraudulent medical assessment submitted to reserve a room in my name, the failed investments in Claudia's company funded by loans I never authorized. Each piece of evidence added another brick to the wall. Finally, Linda Morrison took the stand. She had flown from Phoenix at her own expense, determined to tell her story to anyone who would listen. Her testimony established the pattern that Eleanor had first discovered, and I had confirmed Claudia had done this before she had targeted a vulnerable older man, married into his life, isolated him from his family, and profited from his death. Victor Morrison's fate hung over the courtroom like a ghost demanding justice. Claudia's lawyer objected repeatedly, growing more desperate with each overruled motion. But the final blow came when Dylan took the stand. Claudia's carefully constructed mask shattered the moment she saw her husband rise and walk toward the witness box. Her face contorted with rage, all pretense of gentle concern. "Abandon Dylan," she shouted. "What are you doing? You are betraying your own wife?" Dylan looked at her. Steadily, his eyes clear, his voice calm. "I am protecting my father," he said, "and my daughter from you." Then he played the recording. Claudia's voice filled the courtroom, cold and calculating, confessing to her plans for me and referencing Victor Morrison's fate with chilling casualness. The judge listened without expression. The court reporter's fingers flew across her keyboard. Claudia's lawyer buried his face in his hands when the recording ended. Silence filled the room. Claudia's lawyer rose and requested a recess. The judge denied it with a single word. Then, she delivered her ruling. "This guardianship petition is denied." She announced the evidence presented demonstrates conclusively that the respondent, Arthur Winslow, is mentally competent and fully capable of managing his own affairs. Furthermore, the evidence suggests serious criminal conduct on the part of the petitioner. I am referring this case to the district attorney's office for investigation of forgery, financial exploitation of an elderly person, and related charges. She fixed Claudia with a hard stare. "Mrs. Reed, I strongly advise you to retain criminal defense counsel. Court is adjourned." Two security officers approached Claudia and escorted her toward a side exit. As she passed my table, she leaned close and hissed through clenched teeth, "This is not over." I met her eyes without flinching. I saw the hatred there, the fury of a predator. whose trap had been sprung on herself, but I felt no fear, only the quiet satisfaction of a battle won. Yes, it is. I replied calmly. She was LED away. Dylan put his hand on my shoulder. Richard began gathering his papers, and somewhere I knew Eleanor was smiling. The wheels of justice turned slowly, but they turned with inexorable force 3 months after the guardianship hearing. The district attorney's office completed its investigation and announced formal charges against Claudia Reed. I learned the news from Richard, who called me on a cold February morning with the satisfaction of a general reporting a decisive victory. The charges were comprehensive and devastating forgery, a Class 5 felony, for the loan documents bearing my falsified signature theft from an at-risk adult to Class 4 felony for the unauthorized transactions and fraudulent schemes targeting an elderly person, criminal attempt to obtain unlawful guardianship, a Class 6 felony for the fabricated medical assessments and nursing home arrangements. Together, the charges carried a potential sentence of 8 to 12 years in state prison. Claudia surrendered herself at the Jefferson County Jail on a Thursday afternoon, choosing to turn herself in, rather than face the humiliation of a public arrest. The judge set bond at $150,000, an amount that might as well have been $150 million. Every asset Claudia possessed had been frozen. Pending investigation, her employer had terminated her the week after the hearing, citing gross misconduct and misuse of company resources. Her consulting business, the failed venture funded by loans taken in my name, was now under IRS investigation for tax irregularities. The woman who had schemed to control everything I owned now owned nothing herself. She sat in a jail cell awaiting trial because she could not scrape together even 10% of her bond. I felt no joy at her downfall. I had expected to feel triumph, perhaps even vindication. Instead, I felt only a weary relief that the battle was finally ending. Claudia had consumed years of my life with her machinations. She had stolen my wife's ring, drugged my son, isolated me from my granddaughter, and attempted to imprison me in a nursing home so she could plunder my estate. But hating her required energy. I no longer wished to spend. She would face justice. That was enough. Dylan filed for divorce. The same week Claudia surrendered, the proceedings were uncontested. Claudia, facing criminal charges and possible decades in prison, had no leverage left to fight for custody or assets. The court granted Dylan temporary full custody of Emma with provisions for the arrangement to become permanent once the divorce was finalized the day the custody order came through. Dylan brought Emma to my house. She burst through the front door before he could even park the car, her small legs carrying her across the living room and into my arms with the force of a child who had been waiting months for this moment. "Grandpa," she cried, wrapping her arms around my neck. "Can I live with you?" "Please," Daddy said. "We could stay here. Can we stay forever?" I looked over her shoulder at Dylan, who stood in the doorway with tears streaming down his face. He nodded, unable to speak. "Yes, sweetheart," I said, holding her tight. "You can stay as long as you want. This is your home now, too." That evening, after Emma had fallen asleep in the guest room that would become her bedroom, Dylan and I sat in the kitchen where so much of this story had unfolded. Eleanor's photograph watched over us from the table, her smile a blessing on the reconciliation taking place beneath her gaze. Dylan stared at his hands for a long time before he spoke. When the words finally came, they carried the weight of years of guilt and shame. "That I do not deserve your forgiveness. I let her control me for years. I watched her isolate you, manipulate you, scheme against you, and I did nothing. I abandoned you when you needed me most. When Mom died and you were alone and vulnerable, I let Claudia turn me into a weapon against you. I do not know how to live with that." I reached across the table and lifted his chin until his eyes met mine. "My son, My only child, the boy I had raised and loved and watched grow into a man. He had been lost, but he had found his way home. That was what mattered now. Forgiveness is not a right, Dylan, I said firmly. It is something earned. You cannot erase what happened by apologizing for it, but you can earn back what was lost. By how you live from this day forward, you testified against her when it mattered. You protected Emma. You chose truth over comfort. That is where forgiveness begins. I squeezed his shoulder. You have started earning it. Son, that is what matters. He broke down then, sobbing like a child, and I held him the way I had held him decades ago, when nightmares woke him in the darkness. We stayed that way for a long time. Father and son rebuilding what Claudia had tried to destroy later that night after Dylan had gone to check on Emma and the house had fallen quiet. My phone rang. Richard's name appeared on the screen. Arthur, I have news. He said I finally cracked the password on Eleanor's video file. I've been trying combinations for weeks and tonight I found it. My heart began to pound. The locked video had haunted me since I first discovered it. Eleanor's final secret, waiting to be revealed. What was the password? Richard's voice softened. It was a phrase, I will always protect you, according to Dylan. Those were the words Eleanor spoke to you during your wedding vows. She wanted only you to find this, Arthur. You need to watch it alone. I waited until the house was silent. Dylan had retired to his room, exhausted from the emotional weight of our conversation. Emma slept peacefully down the hall, untroubled by dreams of the chaos that had surrounded her young life, only when I was certain I would not be disturbed. Did I retreat to my study, close the door, and open my laptop? The USB drive containing Eleanor's files was already inserted. I navigated to the video file that had remained locked since I first discovered it. The final secret my wife had hidden for me to find. My fingers trembled as I typed the password. Richard had discovered I will always protect you. The words Eleanor had spoken to me 45 years ago, standing before our families and friends, promising to love me through whatever storms life might bring. She had kept that promise beyond the grave. The file opened, Eleanor's face filled the screen. She was thinner than I remembered from her final months. The cancer having stolen the fullness from her cheeks and the strength from her frame, but her eyes were the same, bright and warm, and filled with the love I had known for nearly half a century. She was sitting in our bedroom, propped against pillows, the afternoon light streaming through the window behind her. She must have recorded this during one of her last good days, when she still had the energy to speak and the clarity to plan my dearest Arthur. She began, and the sound of her voice broke something inside me that I had been holding together through sheer force of will. If you are watching this, you have survived the storm. I always knew you would. You are the strongest man I have ever known, even if you never believed it yourself. She paused to take a breath, the effort visible in her face, but she continued with determination. I discovered what Claudia was years ago, a predator who targets lonely older men, charms her way into their lives, and takes everything they have. I saw the signs because I spent my career watching for them, recognizing the subtle manipulations that destroy families from within. I knew she would come for you after I was gone. I knew you would be vulnerable without me there to protect you. So I spent my last years preparing for the battle I knew would come. Tears streamed down my face, but I could not look away from the screen. The money in the legacy fund. The evidence I gathered about her past, the trust documents, and legal preparations. They are all my parting gifts to you, Arthur. Tools for the fight I could not stay to help you win. I'm sorry I could not tell you while I was alive. I did not want our final months together to be consumed by suspicion and conflict. I wanted to spend that time loving you, not warning you. Perhaps that was selfish, but I hope you can forgive me. She smiled, then the same smile that had captured my heart when we were young. And the world seemed full of endless possibility. But there is one more thing, one more gift I've been saving for this moment. Do you remember when we were young and broke just starting out? How we used to dream about the future? We would lie in bed at night and talk about retiring someday to a little house by the ocean, a place where we could watch the sunset and listen to the waves and grow old together in peace. I never forgot that dream, Arthur, even when life got busy and responsibilities piled up and the years slipped away. I held on to it. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes intense with purpose. 5 years ago, when I first began to suspect what Claudia was, I did something without telling you. I bought us that house, a small cottage in Oceanside, California, overlooking the Pacific Ocean. It is white with blue shutters, and there is a garden in the front that I filled with wildflowers. It is in your name. Richard has the deed. I wanted you to have somewhere to go when this was over, somewhere new, somewhere peaceful, somewhere you could begin again. The tears were falling freely now, blurring my vision. But I could not stop watching. Go there, my love. Start your new life. Take Dylan and Emma with you if they want to come watch. The sunset over the water, and know that I'm watching it with you. I will always be with you, Arthur. I will always protect you. That was my promise. And I intend to keep it forever. She raised her hand to the camera, pressing her palm against the lens, as if reaching through time and space to touch my face. I love you, Arthur. I love you forever. Goodbye. The screen went dark. I sat alone in the silence of my study, weeping, not from grief, but from overwhelming love. My wife had spent her dying days building me a future. She had saved money, gathered evidence, investigated threats, purchased a home, and prepared for a battle. She knew she would never see. Every moment of her final years had been devoted to ensuring that I would survive and thrive after she was gone. I did not deserve such love. No one did, but I had received it anyway. 2 weeks later, I drove to Oceanside, Dylan, and Emma stayed behind in Colorado to finalize the divorce and settle affairs, but they would join me soon. Richard had given me the deed and the keys, and I made the journey alone, needing the solitude to process everything that had happened. The cottage was exactly as Eleanor had described. White walls glowing in the California sun-blue shutters, framing windows that looked out over the endless Pacific. A garden bursting with wildflowers in colors. I could not name the ocean stretched before it like a promise, vast and eternal, its waves whispering secrets to the shore. I parked in the small driveway and sat for a moment, letting the reality wash over me. Eleanor had bought this place 5 years ago. She had planned every detail, chosen every flower, imagined me standing here on this very spot. She had created a home for me before I even knew I needed one. I walked up the path to the front porch and stopped there. Beside the door sat a pot of white lilies. Eleanor's favorite flower, the same lilies I had watered every day in our Colorado kitchen, talking to her spirit, keeping her memory alive. But I had not brought these lilies. I had not told anyone I was coming today. I looked around in confusion, searching for an explanation, and then I saw her, Marjorie, standing at the corner of the garden, smiling through tears that matched my own. Eleanor asked me to do this, she said softly. Years ago, before she passed, she gave me a key and made me promise. She said, when Arthur finally arrives, make sure there are lilies waiting, so he knows he is home. 6 months have passed since Marjorie greeted me with Eleanor's lilies on that California porch. In that time, I have transformed this cottage from a stranger's house into a home filled with memories, both old and new. Eleanor's photograph sits on the mantel above the fireplace, watching over the living room just as it did in Colorado. Her jewelry box rests on my nightstand, close enough to touch when I wake in the darkness, and reach for her out of habit. And every morning without fail, I water the white lilies that bloom in pots along the front porch, talking to her spirit as the Pacific breeze carries my words out over the endless water the conversations have changed in Colorado. I spoke to Eleanor through grief, through loneliness, through the desperate ache of a man who had lost his partner here in Oceanside. I speak to her through gratitude. I thank her for the legacy fund that gave me the resources to fight. I thank her for the evidence that exposed Claudia's true nature. I thank her for this cottage, this garden, this second chance at life that she purchased with her final years of strength. I tell her about Dylan's progress and Emma's laughter and the sunsets that paint the sky in colors I never knew existed. I tell Usha Pasha that I understand now why she kept so many secrets. She was not hiding things from me. She was building a future for me. One careful preparation at a time, 3 months after I arrived, I began teaching a free financial literacy class at the Oceanside Community Center. The students are seniors like myself, men and women who have worked their entire lives and accumulated modest savings that predators would love to steal. I teach them how to recognize scams, how to protect their assets, how to spot the warning signs of financial exploitation. I share my own story without shame, using my experience as a cautionary tale and a message of hope. My class motto hangs on a banner above the whiteboard. My wife saved me. Now I want to help save others. Eleanor would have loved knowing that her sacrifice was multiplied, that her protection extended beyond me to strangers she would never meet. Dylan and Emma visit every month, driving down from San Diego, where they have settled into a new life. Dylan found work as a project manager for a small construction company, rebuilding his career and his self-respect. One project at a time. The fog has lifted completely from his eyes. He laughs again, jokes again, speaks his mind without looking over his shoulder for permission. Emma has flourished without the shadow of her mother's manipulation, darkening her childhood. Collects seashells on the beach and builds elaborate sand castles with her grandfather narrating imaginary kingdoms where princesses rescue themselves and villains always face justice during their last visit. Dylan and I walked along the shoreline while Emma splashed in the shallow waves ahead of us. He was quiet for a long time before he spoke. "Dad, thank you for not giving up on me. I gave you every reason to walk away. I abandoned you, betrayed you, let Claudia use me against you. But you never stopped believing I could find my way back." I watched Emma laugh as a wave surprised her, soaking her shorts and making her squeal with delight. "A father never gives up on his son," I replied. "He just waits for him to find his way home." Claudia's trial concluded 2 months ago. The jury convicted her on all charges after less than 4 hours of deliberation. The judge sentenced her to 6 years in state prison with no possibility of early parole, citing the calculated nature of her crimes and the vulnerability of her victims. Linda Morrison attended the sentencing hearing and wept with relief when the verdict was announced. Her brother Victor finally had justice 5 years after his death. On that Arizona mountain road, when Claudia is released, she will be 46 years old, broke, disgraced, and utterly alone. The predator has become the prisoner this evening. I stand on my porch watching the sunset ignite the Pacific in shades of orange and gold. The lilies sway gently in the breeze. The wildflowers Eleanor planted have spread across the garden in riots of color. Somewhere inside dinner waits on the stove, and Eleanor's photograph waits on the mantle. A car pulls up at the end of the road. The engine cuts off and a figure steps out. Even at this distance, I recognize her. Claudia, gaunt and hollow after months of detention, awaiting sentencing, her designer clothes replaced by something plain and ill-fitting. She stands beside the car and stares at the cottage, at the garden, at me. Perhaps she came to beg for forgiveness. Perhaps she came to threaten revenge. Perhaps she simply needed to see with her own eyes what she had failed to steal. I feel no anger as I watch her, no fear, no hatred, only the quiet peace of a man who has survived his war and built something beautiful from the wreckage. Claudia has no power over me anymore. She never will again. I reach down and gently close the garden gate. Then I turn my back on her and walk inside, letting the screen door swing shut behind me. Eleanor's photograph catches the last light of the sunset, her smile glowing warm and eternal. I pick it up and hold it close, feeling the weight of everything she gave me, everything she sacrificed, everything she prepared. You told me to step away. I whispered to her image, so I did. And I found myself outside. I hear a car engine start and fade into the distance. I do not look. I do not need to. My war is over. My life is my own. And Eleanor is still protecting me, just as she promised she always would if you have stayed with me. Until the very end, thank you. This story began with a single text message that erased a father from his own family. And it ended with that same father standing in the home his wife built for him, watching his enemy drive away into irrelevance. Arthur Winslow lost everything he thought he knew about his family, but he gained something far more precious. He gained the truth. He gained his son back. He gained a future that Eleanor spent her dying days preparing for him. This is more than a story about revenge. It is a story about the love that protects us, even when those we love are gone. It is about the strength we discover when we are pushed to our breaking point, and it is about the quiet dignity of refusing to let predators win. If this story moved you, if it made you think about your own family and the people you trust, I hope you will share it with someone who needs to hear it. Too many seniors suffer in silence, isolated by manipulators who count on shame and confusion to keep their victims quiet. Arthur fought back because Eleanor gave him the tools to fight. Not everyone is so fortunate, but awareness is the first step toward protection. Please leave a comment below and tell me what part of this story stayed with you the most. Was it Eleanor's preparation, Dylan's redemption, the moment Arthur closed the garden gate? I read every comment, and your thoughts help me create stories that matter. Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring, and remember, it is never too late to step away from those who harm you and find your way home.